Afghan refugees have begun arriving in New Mexico this week after fleeing their homeland during the recent Taliban takeover. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and Speaker of the House Brian Egolf sent a letter to President Biden last week indicating our state is waiting with open arms to help those refugees. Mobilization efforts are underway, and at least some of the Afghans are already being housed on a part of Fort Bliss Army Base that is located, as you know, in southern New Mexico. And Senator, other states have also indicated their willingness to house these refugees. But do you expect any political dust-up from this move?
I don't know. I would doubt it. I think there's widespread sympathy for Afghan refugees and for getting them out of the country. There's been a hue and cry from the Afghan community here in New Mexico, which includes several hundreds that have already come here from previous waves.
That's right.
To extend the deadline beyond August 31st. And I think that's kind of a political point, perhaps, because you can see the reason why Biden might want to end it August 31st. But I think that New Mexicans have been friendly to refugees like this from Iraq. There's an Iraqi community here in Albuquerque. And there was a rally to support Afghan refugees on Civic Plaza about a week ago. And so I think there are Lutheran Family Services, there are programs that are set up. The city now has a refugee office that is giving out advice and telling the huge number of people who have come forward and saying, we would be willing to help. Right. We would be willing to house refugees. It's really kind of heartwarming.
I have to agree. Michael, Governor Lujan Grisham and Speaker Egolf in their letter to President Biden mentioned New Mexico's cultural diversity and history of welcoming refugees, as Senator just mentioned, from around the world. We actually even have a refugee resettlement program, of course, administered by the Human Services Department as well. And Dan, you reported earlier this week the state already has resettled a handful of Afghan refugees over the last year. That was interesting. Talk about that if you would.
Yeah, it's a small number. I was surprised to see those numbers too. I mean, I think it was only a half dozen or so Afghan refugees, but have already been resettled here in the last year. So I think clearly that program is up and running. That will probably help with this effort. Today, President Biden is going to be meeting with some governors. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is going to be taking part in that call. So clearly kind of wheels are in motion. We don't have a lot of details on yet as far as numbers and exactly where, things like that. I will say maybe I'm a little more cynical than Senator Feldman, but I do see this also having some political overtones. Already, Congresswoman Yvette Herrell has expressed concern about making sure American citizens in Afghanistan are kind of brought back before refugees are resettled. So I could see, some of those kind of debates heating up over the coming weeks, but certainly there does seem to also be kind of a genuine desire to help these people in a time of need.
Interesting points there. Michael Byrd, details and direction from the federal government a little slim at this point. No one knows for sure how long the resettlement will take, as Dan sort of hinted at there. What's our capacity for this really as a state? When you really think about it, can we accept thousands in five figures, 10,000 and more? Is it just 5,000, 500? How do we assess that?
Well, I think one way of assessing it would be looking at every state's capacity to handle that. But I think on a larger scale, in terms of it, this is not just the United States issue. I mean, there are many other nations who were involved in Afghanistan, and in fact, those nations also have a duty and an obligation to protect and welcome these refugees. And this country is not only made up of refugees, but immigrants. And some of the first refugees were probably the Pilgrims. So there is some from a historical perspective. We all need to recognize that there is a history in this nation of welcoming people, not always in the way that we should, but given our military and economic involvement in Afghanistan, I really think. I guess I'm of the opinion that goes back to you broke it, you own it, and we do we do owe these people as much as we possibly can provide. We have had it. Those of us who remember Vietnam and can reflect upon that. And there's some lessons to be learned from that. And I'm not sure we've learned all the lessons that came out of that.
Right.
But we do need to do as much as we can, as well as we can, for those people who fought with us, for us, and many who died with us.
I appreciate that so much. You know, some of the numbers are interesting. This is the largest U.S. military removal of non-combatants since 20,000 Americans and a volcano eruption in the Philippines in '91. I remember that. And Michael mentions Senator Feldman, Vietnam. We hustled 100,000 people out of there in short order, and much shorter, as a matter of fact. I gotta go back to this idea of how does this complicate the COVID restrictions that the governor's put in place last week, especially in light, you know, of her vaccination requirements. Does the governor have a problem on her hands there politically a little bit?
Yes, I think COVID is a fly in the ointment, and may require quarantine of some of these folks when they come to the state initially.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen with the Vietnamese resettlement. We didn't have that problem at the time. And we also didn't have the political divide that we have now. But remember, you know, the whole international district, or so many people that live in the international district, are indirectly products of the flotillas and of the boat people and of the Laotian crisis. That they have come here and they have now become citizens of our city. In fact, I think the city's director of refugees said 60,000 people in New Mexico are immigrants or refugees. That's 10%. That's, you know, almost 10% of our population. So it will work out over time, but it will be difficult initially.
Dan, let me jump to you on I'm still on this vaccination kick here a little bit. The governor has acknowledged that there's some room for improvement with vaccinating people seeking asylum or otherwise, you know, migrating. Is there a problem to solve, or should the feds be doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the governor had indicated at a recent news conference that she had spoken with some federal officials, Homeland Security, about making sure individuals are screened or tested, you know, when they're, especially with the southern border. But I think that likely applies as well to these refugees. I mean, I do think it's you know, as Dee Dee mentioned, there's ways to address it. I mean, a quarantine period, testing, you know, things like that. I don't think it's, but I think some of that should come from the federal government when we're talking about immigration, things like that. But, you know, knowing how these things work, it probably wouldn't be a bad thing for the state to have a plan in place to address some of that as well.
That's a good point. I'll remind folks, we've got, as we tape this, we've got the president speaking a little bit later this afternoon on this, and it's going to be, we're working to get more information about the resettlement, certainly, efforts and how you can help out, including a Facebook Live I did yesterday with Lutheran Family Services, mentioned by Senator Feldman. I encourage you to give it a watch. Still to come here on New Mexico in Focus, New Mexico's dangerous roads.